I just want to get into this because it just brought me back to like our fan base. And did you see that when DB came back and played for us, that they got mad that our fan base was booing her? Can I give you this scenario?
Yeah.
You're witnessing the exact moment Sophie Cunningham accidentally broke a system that's been controlling WNBA narratives for decades. What started as a simple podcast conversation about Dewana Bonner's messy exit has unleashed something way bigger. And the traditional media gatekeepers are absolutely panicking. Here's what they don't want you to know. Sophie just proved that WNBA players don't need ESPN, The Athletic, or any of the old guard media personalities to control their own stories. She bypassed every single traditional channel, spoke directly to fans, and generated more authentic engagement than most established sports journalists get in a month. And that's terrifying for an industry that's built its entire business model on being the middleman between athletes and audiences. Before we dive into how Sophie accidentally triggered the collapse of WNBA's media ecosystem, smash that like button and drop a fire emoji if you think players should control their own narratives instead of letting journalists filter everything through their agendas. I'm Jax Riley, and I've been tracking the digital signals around this story since Sophie's podcast dropped. What I discovered goes way beyond the Bonner controversy. We're watching the birth of a completely new media paradigm that's about to change everything. The traditional sports media establishment spent years building walls around WNBA coverage, deciding which stories get told and how. Sophie just proved those walls are made of paper. Let me walk you through exactly how one podcast episode exposed the entire system's weakness and why every major sports media company is now scrambling to sign WNBA players before they lose complete control of the narrative. The first signal that something massive was happening came from the numbers. Sophie Cunningham's social media reach has quietly exploded to over 1.6 million TikTok followers and 1.1 million Instagram followers. That's not just impressive for a WNBA player. That's more influence than most traditional WNBA media personalities combined. She's built an empire while the established media wasn't even paying attention. But here's what makes this revolutionary. Sophie didn't build that following by playing nice with the media gatekeepers. She did it by speaking the language that actual sports fans understand: competitive, unfiltered, and real. While other players were carefully managing their public personas through traditional channels, Sophie was connecting directly with audiences who were hungry for authenticity.
Can I give you this scenario?
Yeah.
I like DB because like DB was one of my vets when I was in Phoenix, and then we gathered here into Indiana, and like it was kind of a surprise that she was signed to Indiana anyway, and so we'll take her in a heartbeat. Like, she's a Hall of Famer, she's a hell of a basketball player, can score from anywhere on the court, but she got to Indiana and she just like really wasn't happy, and like I want people to be happy, so that's why I'm kind of like neutral on this one, which a lot of people are surprised about. She's towards the end of her career, so like she deserves her flowers, she deserves to be happy, but I also think that if you're gonna leave...
Was there explanation when it happened? No. Not even privately? Yeah, I mean, okay. That's tough. And, yeah, okay. Well, I did say what? Unless you leave on some fuck you type shit, and that's what that is, so.
Yeah, I'm still rooting for her. Like, I want her to end her career and be happy, but I also think that, like, it's okay to be professional about it, and, like, send a text to your teammates. Send a text and be like, hey, like, love you guys, or you don't even have to say love you guys, just like, hey, sorry this didn't work out, good luck, da-da-da-da. You know what I mean? Like, there's a way to handle that, I think.
That revelation right there, that's the moment everything changed. Sophie didn't go through ESPN, she didn't leak it to The Athletic, she didn't even hint at it on social media first. She sat down with her co-host on Show Me Something and dropped nuclear intelligence. That completely reframed the entire Bonner controversy. No editors, no filters, No corporate messaging, just raw truth directly to the audience. Think about what that represents. For years, if a player had inside information about locker room dynamics or teammate conflicts, that information would flow through established media channels. A player might hint at something to a beat reporter who would then craft it into a story with multiple sources and careful corporate language. The media controlled the timing, the framing, and the impact. Sophie said, "Screw that entire system," and told the story herself. More importantly, she told it better than any traditional journalist could have, because she was actually there. She had the credibility, the inside knowledge, and the platform to reach millions without asking permission from anyone. But here's where the competitive intelligence gets really interesting. And this is the angle that every other content creator completely missed. Sophie's podcast isn't just some independent operation. It's distributed through The Volume, which is Colin Cowherd's media empire. This represents the first major crossover between WNBA player content and mainstream sports media infrastructure. The Volume didn't sign Sophie because they wanted to be nice to the WNBA. They signed her because they recognized something that traditional basketball media missed. Authentic player voices can generate massive engagement when given the right platform. While ESPN was still treating WNBA coverage as a diversity checkbox, Colin Cowherd's team saw the business opportunity. That partnership validates something revolutionary. WNBA players don't need WNBA-specific media anymore. They can plug directly into the mainstream sports entertainment ecosystem and reach audiences that traditional basketball coverage never could. Sophie's success is going to inspire other players to skip the middleman entirely. And the traditional gatekeepers? They're starting to panic. Multiple sources in the industry are reporting that major sports media companies are now aggressively pursuing WNBA players for podcast deals. Why? Because Sophie proved the market viability of unfiltered player content. She demonstrated that audiences will choose authentic player voices over carefully managed corporate messaging every single time. But here's what makes Sophie's approach so dangerous to the establishment. She's not just telling her own story. She's willing to break the unwritten rules about protecting other players from criticism. Traditional WNBA media has operated under this collective protection mindset where you don't publicly criticize veterans, you don't call out unprofessional behavior, and you definitely don't give fans ammunition to be toxic. Sophie looked at that system and said, "It's broken." She told the truth about DeWanna Bonner's exit because it was the truth, not because it was politically safe. That willingness to prioritize authenticity over politics is exactly what new WNBA fans have been craving, and it's what traditional media has been too scared to provide.
And it literally pisses me off when people are like, "She's not the face of the league."
Who would be?
What?
Sabrina? No.
No, there's really good, well-known people in our league. I'm not discrediting them. We have a lot of badasses in our league.
Yeah.
Hell yeah to that. I'm all for that. But when people try to argue that she's not the face of our league, or if our league would be where we're at without her, you're dumb as shit.
Yeah.
You're literally dumb as fuck.
That passionate defense of Caitlin Clark? That's Sophie speaking directly to the audience that traditional WNBA media has been alienating for months. While established journalists were crafting careful takes about growing pains and finding balance, Sophie called the Clark deniers dumb as shit and meant every word of it. That's not just authentic. That's strategically brilliant. Sophie identified the largest and most passionate segment of WNBA's new audience and spoke their language instead of trying to appease the old guard. She chose growth over gatekeeping, and her social media numbers prove it worked. The media establishment wants players to speak in corporate-approved sound bites because it maintains their role as interpreters and analyzers. When Sophie speaks directly and authentically, she eliminates the need for that interpretation layer. Fans don't need a journalist to explain what Sophie meant. She said exactly what she meant, and she said it clearly. This creates an existential crisis for traditional sports media. If players can reach millions of fans directly, build their own audiences, and control their own narratives, what's the value proposition for traditional journalism? The old model depended on access scarcity. Journalists had the relationships and the platforms that players needed. Sophie just proved that scarcity was artificial. But the revolution goes beyond just individual players. Sophie's success is creating a new expectation for athlete communication across the entire league. Fans are starting to demand the same level of authenticity from other players. The carefully managed, diplomatically worded responses that used to be standard are now getting called out as corporate and fake. Other players are watching Sophie's engagement numbers and asking themselves why they're still filtering their thoughts through traditional media when they could be building their own direct relationships with fans. The incentive structure has completely flipped. And here's the prediction that's going to make traditional media executives lose sleep. Within 6 months, we're going to see at least 3 to 5 other prominent WNBA players launch their own podcast shows using Sophie's authenticity model. They've seen the proof of concept work, they've seen the audience engagement, and they've seen how much power comes with controlling your own narrative. The sports media companies know this is coming, which is why they're now throwing money at WNBA players for exclusive content deals. They're trying to lock up talent before those players realize they don't need traditional media partnerships at all. But they're fighting against a fundamental shift in how audiences consume sports content. Sophie didn't just break the WNBA media system, she exposed how fragile it always was. The entire structure depended on players believing they needed traditional media more than traditional media needed them. Sophie flipped that equation and proved that authentic player voices with direct audience access are infinitely more valuable than filtered corporate messaging.
Because I think there's 2 different types of players, though, that, like, some people can take a boo, and other players, kind of like me, which, like, fans are dumb, but that like, shit hypes me up. Like, I'm all for that. Like, if you give me that energy, then I want some, like, fuck you energy. But, like, that's what makes sports so good, too, is, like, just the competitiveness and, like, people hating each other, but also, like, the sport is bringing everyone together. Like, I don't know, I just love that.
That understanding of competitive sports culture, that's what traditional WNBA media has been missing for years. They've been trying to sanitize and corporatize a fundamentally competitive and emotional product. Sophie speaks the language that actual sports fans understand. Rivalry, competition, and authentic emotion drive engagement, not diplomatic neutrality. The media establishment pushed this protective, everyone gets respected narrative because it was safe and avoided controversy. Sophie proved that controversy and authentic emotion are exactly what audiences want. She turned conflict into content and criticism into credibility. Now here's where this gets really interesting from a business perspective. Sophie's success is going to fundamentally change contract negotiations for WNBA players. Media appearance clauses, social media, restrictions, and corporate partnership obligations are all going to be renegotiated because players now understand their independent market value. When Sophie can reach 1.6 million people directly without any corporate filter, why would she accept restrictions on her authentic voice? When she can generate massive engagement by speaking truthfully about league issues, why would she agree to only make approved statements? The power dynamic has shifted, and traditional media is scrambling to adapt. Some will try to co-opt the authenticity trend by giving players more freedom within their platforms. Others will double down on access journalism and hope teams pressure players to maintain traditional relationships. But the smartest operators are already building new models that recognize player agency and audience preferences. What Sophie accidentally created is a template that works across all professional sports. Authentic player voices with direct audience access will always outperform corporate filtered messaging when the content quality is there. She proved that fans would rather hear unfiltered truth from someone who was actually in the room than carefully crafted takes from journalists who weren't. The traditional model treated players as sources and audiences as consumers. Sophie's model treats players as content creators and audiences as community members. That fundamental shift in relationship dynamics is what's driving the media chaos we're seeing. But here's the part that should terrify established sports media. Sophie's success isn't dependent on basketball performance. Her influence and audience engagement exist independently of her on-court production. She's built a media platform that transcends her role as a role player, which means other players can replicate this regardless of their statistical output. That democratization of media influence is revolutionary. Previously, only star players had significant media leverage. Sophie proved that personality, authenticity, and audience connection can create media power that rivals traditional star status. Every player in the league is now looking at their own potential for direct audience engagement. The Bonner controversy was just the catalyst. The real story is how Sophie used that moment to demonstrate a completely different way for athletes to communicate with their audiences. She showed that being authentic, even when it's controversial, generates more genuine engagement than being safe and corporate. Traditional media spent years building barriers between athletes and audiences, convincing everyone that professional journalism was necessary to translate athlete thoughts into consumable content. Sophie eliminated the translator and spoke directly to the people who actually care about her perspective. The sports media companies that adapt to this new reality will thrive by partnering with athletes instead of trying to control them. The ones that cling to gatekeeping models will become increasingly irrelevant as players build their own direct audience relationships. What we're witnessing is the birth of athlete-controlled sports media, and Sophie Cunningham accidentally became the architect of the revolution. Traditional journalists can either evolve to add value in this new ecosystem or watch their influence evaporate as players speak directly to the audiences that traditional media spent decades trying to own. The WNBA media system that existed 6 months ago is already dead. It just doesn't know it yet. Sophie proved that authentic player voices will always beat filtered corporate messaging when given equal platform access. Now every player in the league knows they have options beyond traditional media gatekeepers, and that's why you're seeing media chaos. The old system depended on artificial scarcity and controlled access. Sophie broke both of those dependencies and showed every WNBA player a path to independent media influence. The revolution isn't coming. It's already here. If you want to, stay ahead of this media transformation as it spreads across all professional sports. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Drop a comment with your prediction for which WNBA player will launch the next major podcast, and share this video with anyone who wants to understand how athlete media is really changing. The gatekeepers had their run. Now it's the players. Turn to control their own stories. Thanks for watching, and remember, the revolution will be podcasted.